My name is James Matson, and I'm the Clinical Operations Manager of IM Clinic in Denver, Colorado. So we are a clinic that works primarily with gender and sexuality. And in my background, I did my undergrad in comparative religion and then got my master's through a seminary. And so I've really specialized in the intersection of spirituality and sexuality and how those work together, especially in the area of gender with kids. So a big number of my clients have been teenagers, young kids and teenagers who are coming out as trans or gender non-binary or gender creative and are interacting with religious parents. And so I've worked a lot with parents who are trying to figure out how do I engage with my kid with this, and a lot with kids on how do I engage with my own faith and understanding who I am. And so I think there are a few things that can feel a little bit confusing for parents sometimes, but I think are important to keep in mind and to kind of take note of. And so the first one, and it seems a little bit obvious, but the first point is that parents can have a significant impact on the way that their kids have a relationship with God. So one of the dynamics that can happen sometimes is that kids can learn that they have to take care of their parents. And so what happens with that is that if I feel like something about myself, something about my identity, something about my experience upsets mom or dad, then what I start to do is create these two piles. One pile is clean, one pile is dirty. And the things that go in the clean pile are going to be things that I'm willing to share, that I tend to play up, that I make a really big piece of myself. And the things that are in the dirty pile, I keep hidden. They're things that I learned that I can't show anyone, that I can't engage with, and that a lot of times I'm going to try to make not be there at all. And so, what we really learn to do with that is that my value to you in relationships starts to be based on my performance. It's based on how well I can play up these good sides of myself and keep hidden the bad sides. What happens is that kids can apply that to God, and we can create a similar dynamic to God. That I learned that God will love me or approve of me, or I will be valuable to God when I can please Him, when my behavior looks good, and I fit kind of the model that I'm supposed to fit. That's when I am good or holy or righteous. And so a lot of times what it leads to is kids that really swallow their own identities. Even if they're willing to come out, it tends to be a place of confusion and a little bit of hesitation. And I think the other piece within that is that when I feel like I have to caretake my parent, that your emotional well-being is dependent on my performance, my behavior, I believe the same is true of God. That God's approval of me, or me keeping God happy, which is a major goal that I feel like I have to do, is really dependent on the way that I can perform well or not. And I feel like my performance is the foundation for my success with my relationship with God. It can create basically fear that looks a lot like devotion. And so kids can look like they're pouring themselves very strongly into this faith and living in a way that they want to try to be as pleasing to God as possible. But a lot of times it comes from a fear of salvation or a fear of not being good enough, not measuring up. And so the shift that happens from parents to God is that parents have authority. They have impact on your kids' lives, but God is seen as this ultimate authority. And so it's a step even further that it's not just me trying to please mom and dad so that I have value to them, so that I am loved and worthy. It's a fear that if I don't perform well enough, that I will go to hell, or there's this risk of eternal damnation. One of the other things to keep in mind, a next point, is that emphasis in religion on self-sacrifice can lead kids to a pretty internalized sense of stigma. And so with most faith structures, there's an emphasis that you should be serving others, that you should put other people's needs before your own. And that's kind of a universal theme of self-sacrifice and self-serving. The issue is that when we build on the stuff that we've already talked about, kids learn that their appropriate role within a relationship is to be a martyr. That I am sacrificing myself so deeply to make sure that I'm taking care of you, that your needs are met, that I can start to align with the other person or the other God, the other, more than I align with myself. And when I start to do that, I self sacrifice to a point that I start to believe that there is something bad or wrong with the needs that I have. And so it leads to that strong separation, and it leads to an even stronger separation that I feel like I can't engage with myself and still be okay. Another point that can be really important for parents to understand is that even though your faith community may be very open and very accepting, most faiths are pretty binary in a lot of ways. That we look at various creation stories across various religions, and a lot of them have a strong emphasis on male and female. And for a kid that doesn't strongly align with either of those two categories, or feels like they're still trying to navigate that experience can be really isolating. It leads to a sense of, how do I fit into this structure? How do I fit into the world? How do I fit into the family, into the community? Because I don't follow one of those two patterns. And we see it socially with kids, but when we throw in that religious or faith lens, it becomes even stronger. Because if this is the way that we are taught or believe that we are supposed to act in the world, and I don't fit either of those options, it leaves me in a really big void about what does devotion look like for me? How do I live righteously? How do I live in a way that doesn't directly mirror one of the models that I've been given? They all actually come from a common source. And so identifying that you may not fit into A or B, male or female, that might not be who you are, but you still have just as much of the divine in you as someone who does fall into one of those two categories. So it's really important to tailor your answers to the questions that your kids are asking. Sometimes as a parent, kid asks a question and I go, oh, I need to give you all the information, where that may not be developmentally appropriate. So knowing it's okay not to give all of the details right off the bat, but I can answer the question that you're asking and then ask you if it feels like it's good enough. And if it doesn't, chances are pretty high your kid is going to come back and say, yeah, but I still don't understand this. And so allowing them to really guide that conversation, allowing them to guide the questioning as it occurs, takes some of the pressure off the parents, but also gives the kid a lot of empowerment. One of the problems that a lot of parents face is that kids can hold the parents accountable for the words of the pastor. It's something that I've seen with a lot of my clients, both kids and adults, that the pastor is seen as an extension of mom and dad. So mom and dad are the model for how we understand God, and the pastor is really the voice of God enacted in a lot of these traditions. And so if the pastor says it, a lot of times it's seen as truth. And that's especially true if mom and dad aren't willing to have the conversation that say, hey, we don't really agree with what he said. He or she or they said that it doesn't have to be fact just because it comes from the pastor. And so an important piece for parents within this is engage in a dialogue with your kids. I think it's also important to recognize as a parent, though, that you may be put in a position to have to go to bat for your kid. That there was a kid who was pretty hurt by some of the things that were said by a pastor. And mom and dad were receptive to that and went to the pastor and had some private conversations and engaged with him on those points. But in working with the kid didn't realize that that had happened. And so there was a lot of hurt and a lot of betrayal that the pastor said this and you didn't do anything about it. And the kid just didn't know that mom and dad had actually done a lot of advocacy. And so when you find yourself in a position of being an advocate for your kid within your faith community, it's really important to bring them in on that dialogue. If you feel like it's inappropriate to have them in the meeting specifically, that's fair. But take some time to write down what are things that you want me to talk to them about? What are questions you want me to ask? What are things that you wanted to know about your experience? And being willing to give your kid kind of a debrief about, here's what he or she said. Here's how the conversation went. Here's what we're going to do about it. Kids a lot of times will feel pretty empowered depending on how they're engaging with their faith structure to be able to have those conversations themselves. It really teaches your kids to question the things that they're given. There's some critical thinking that can happen in that. And especially with kids who don't fit into the binary or the standard way of experiencing faith, it's extremely important that they have the confidence to be able to ask the questions and to push back where it's necessary. When we don't empower our kids to do that, those ideologies can get swallowed whole and really emphasize that shame and that stigma that leads to that division of good and bad later in life and plays out in a lot of different ways. Sometimes we hit a point that is ideologically or spiritually incompatible with our convictions, and we're forced to take a stand. And I think within those situations, it's important to teach your kids to have the dialogue, to ask the questions, to engage like we talked about, but knowing where your lines are. Like a lot of times we'll talk about non-negotiables, and there are sometimes that this is a hill that I'm willing to die on. And it's important that if you hit those hills, you have those conversations with your kids and you go, hey, we're going to find a different church because of this. And this is something we've talked about, and this is the way that we've looked at it. And really within that process, you get to model to your kids what it looks like to create a dialogue, to have communication, and to make a decision that is in line with who they are, that is affirming who they are. Sometimes, or a lot of times, when kids come out to parents, and especially parents with a strong faith basis, it can leave you feeling like you really have to choose your kid or your faith. And the good news is that you don't. There is nothing that says that they're mutually exclusive or one trumps the other. And I think that there's actually a lot of risk in thinking like that. There's been a movement in therapy that says, hey, if your religion doesn't fit your identity, lose your religion. The other side of the fence is if your religion doesn't fit your identity, lose your identity. And neither of those are really healthy. So cohesive identity gets to be both. And I've seen countless families who have navigated this really, really well. There are periods that are rough. There's hard conversations. Oftentimes it leaves parents really having to assess their theology, figure out what they believe, how they stand, and then come to their kids to be able to say, here's how I've learned from you. Here's how I've grown. And it strengthens the relationship. It strengthens the relationship between child and parent. It strengthens the relationship between parent and God. Child and God can be a really healthy, really cohesive, really integrating experience. So even through those hard questions, and even through the discomfort, having to really push into what you believe and what you don't, remember that there is light at the other end of that tunnel, and that things will work out, and they can work out really effectively. Just don't be afraid to engage in hard conversations.